Hello and welcome to Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast. I'm Manu, and it's a full house today. I'm joined by Stefan Bienkowski and Matt Ford. First of all, Stefan, how's it going? How's your evening been?
Yeah, not bad. We were just discussing the pitfalls of parenthood just before we started recording there, weren't we, about this kind of new concept of children getting sick from other people and then bringing it into your house like some sort of foreign agent. And causing havoc, and it's causing havoc in both our households at the minute. So yeah, my poor wife is choked with a cold after my son had it for a week, and old I'm the old warhorse still standing while everyone else is falling around me. But besides that, I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
Yeah, 66% of my household is down too, which means my wife and my child. So I'm still doing good. I'm keeping all my fingers crossed. You mentioned before we went online that apparently how nature works is that our immune systems aren't in tune, so that only one of us will get it. I hope that's true.
Do you know what? We might have some medical professionals in the listenership who could tell us, but I could have swore I read during the pandemic that people subconsciously are attracted to folk with other types of immune systems from them, so that biologically speaking, two partners never get sick from the same thing. Because obviously, evolutionary speaking, it makes sense because one of them always has to look after the kid. And by and large, that kind of works. Me and my wife never tend to get sick from the same thing, but I fear we're getting way off course here already.
We are. Matt, how's it going?
Yet.
I'm just wondering what podcast I've joined. Maybe I've been invited into the wrong podcast studio.
This is the Gegenpressing Daddy's podcast. That's what you signed on for, right? Like,
this is actually the World Health Organization.
Well, I'm happy to be here. You know. So seems like a good podcast.
If you're here for the Bundesliga chat, the next 60 minutes is going to be about medical and kids and daycare. I hope you're up for it.
As long as it's not transmissible via computer screen, I'm all right.
It is not. No, guys, this is the right podcast. We are doing Bundesliga stuff, and we kind of chatted a little bit about topics ahead of the show, and I feel like a good place to start is the bonkers game between Dortmund and Stuttgart, 3-3, the final result. I'm going to frame this the right way. I want to say a team that should be good against a team that actually is good, and the team that's actually good earned a late point at Signal Iduna Park, and that's VfB Stuttgart. And maybe should have gotten more out of this Undav tremendous performance, showing the sort of style and football that made him a popular signing when he first joined, right? And then we didn't see it because of mostly out of health, and he's now slowly making his way back and played a tremendous game of football. Dortmund took the lead twice and gave this game away. And I think in the end we're maybe a little lucky to actually win it. Matt, Dortmund, we had so much hope and promise for them. They threw away 2 points against VfB. Throwing away 2 points here, and you gotta say, okay, threw away 2 points, but against the Stuttgart team, that I think when you look at the table too, are thereabouts 22 points, maybe not even a worse team than Dortmund at the moment.
At the moment, no, definitely not. I mean, you've got a striker like Dennis Undav in the sort of form that he's in. I think they were well worth at the very least a point in Dortmund on Saturday. Maybe even more, although as we'll get onto it. But Dortmund did have their phases, so probably on balance it probably was a fair point. But Stuttgart certainly come out of that as the happier of the two teams. Last time we spoke in depth about Dortmund, I think it was it in the wake of the 1-1 draw away at Hamburg. Before the international break, when we were discussing, to what extent is Niko Kovac being doubted or coming under pressure, and I think we sort of agreed by the end of that it's not catastrophic. No one's calling for his head, but it's not been an impressive month. It's not been an easy month. There are little issues creeping in, and I think again, I still don't think we're at the point where there's huge amounts of pressure being put on Niko Kovac, but I think the events of Saturday maybe added a couple more doubts there potentially. Again, I wouldn't want to overly dramatise it, but I mean, we mentioned the Haas foul game with the last minute equaliser. There was the lead thrown away twice away at St. Pauli on the opening day, 3-3. 2-goal lead thrown away away at Juventus. A bit of a different calibre of team, but still, Dortmund are supposed to be a Champions League calibre side as well. Thrown away a lead twice against Stuttgart. And even some of the games they've won recently, Augsburg away, unspectacular. Cologne at home, pretty fortunate, to be honest, to finally break that Cologne defence down in the 97th minute. And I think we sort of excused them a little bit last time we spoke, given the difficult travel plans and the schedule. They had that period of like 6 out of 7 games or 6 out of 8 games away from home. So there was a sense of just get the points in the bag, move on, remain in contention, remain in the top 4 going into the second half of the season, remain in the cup, which they still are. Again, very, very, very close call, penalty shootout away at Frankfurt. It is very much on a knife edge. They've been on this tightrope, haven't they, over the past month or so, Dortmund? And yeah, you just if you're looking at it as glass half full, they're still in the top 4, they're still in the cup, they're still in a semi decent position in the Champions League with relatively easy games on paper to come now with Villarreal and Bodo Glimt at home. So you can look at it in that sense and say this is actually okay.
Yeah.
But like I said, just those doubts, throwing away leads, poor sloppy defending, not being clinical enough going forward, looking particularly at Kai Madiemi, although we obviously did get a goal at the weekend. Yeah, there's a few little doubts creeping in, and it'll be interesting to see how this next run of form that they have coming up now is on, because it's almost the opposite of this run of away games that they had. They've now got a load of home games coming up. I think 7 of the next 8 or so, or something like that, are at home going to Christmas. So it's an interesting period. I don't think there's like I said, I don't think there's massive amounts of pressure on Kovac yet, and we'll get onto the annual general meeting in a second. No sign of criticism of him, if anything, quite the contrary. But yeah, I just wonder between now and Christmas, if this tightrope act continues, which way the mood will tip in Dortmund.
I mean, we get to the AGM in a moment, and I think there is a mood swing happening at the club. But just some thoughts that I had. The issue with Guirassy not scoring goals is becoming ever more prevalent. I know they scored 3 goals here, but it's becoming an ever increasing issue. I know Adeyemi scored a goal, but the stuff that happened during the international break, and then his hand signaling after he made it 3-2, doesn't help. It doesn't help him. It doesn't help the club. It doesn't help quieten things down. It doesn't fix the fact that his performances haven't been good. Of course, he's being linked to Arsenal and a bunch of international clubs over the last few days and today. But Adeyemi is one of those players, of many players in this generation of German national team players that have far too many headlines off the pitch, are very problematic. I think in terms of what's happening with the club, it doesn't help the club at all. I think the stability now of Emre Can back, I think, was a big issue. I think they were almost better without him, and him being captain, that means structurally he has to be somehow integrated in this team. And I know, Stefan, you probably have some things to say about that as well. But that's a real big problem, right? If you have to play a player who's probably playing in a position he shouldn't be playing at. And then I think The other issue here, and I think Undav answered this so well after Adeyemi's hand gesture. He makes his hand gesture, and then Undav scores with the next attack and kind of puts a finger to his mouth, sort of saying, "Well, why don't you guys all shut up?" And I thought it was fitting. It was a very fitting gesture. You kind of putting it into perspective for Dortmund. Of course, the noise continues, and I think you look at the squad overall. There's stories today with Fabio Silva wanting out, right? You have one striker who doesn't score and another striker who's not playing and wants to leave. I mean, Stefan, we talked a little bit ahead of this chat, but you think that they probably need to do a lot of work with this team.
Yeah, I think they do. I mean, my newsletter this week's actually on Guirassy and kind of what's gone wrong for him this season, and to a large extent why he hasn't been the player that they maybe thought they'd signed from Stuttgart in 2024, and there's a whole lot of reasons behind that. But I think if I'm not mistaken, it's now 8 games he's gone without a goal or assist. You can maybe argue he gets a shot assist, I think, for Maximilian Bayer's goal because he hits the shot, and poor Alexander Nubel can't help but fumble the shot right into the hands of, or into the feet rather, of Maximilian Bayer. And yeah, of course, Guirassy did score, but it was offside narrowly. But yeah, like Matt mentioned, Undav there, and I think the big difference between these two teams was the guy up front for both of them. Undav was just completely unplayable. You could question Henry Chan's defending for the first goal, where he just kind of lets Undav bring it down. But the fact that he manages to kind of score this goal over the top of his own shoulder with a volley was just incredible. Some of the shots, everything, he was just impossible to get near. And we all know how good Undav can be when he's on the top of his game, and he certainly was. And Stuttgart kept coming. And I think there's some I looked up some interesting stats before we started recording, and I think it goes maybe a long way to kind of summing up the nature of this game, because Dortmund definitely had, I thought it was a pretty open game in the first half, but I think it was also a game where Dortmund maybe went into the half just about kind of, comfortably in the lead, and perhaps deservingly so, even though Stuttgart had their chances. But in the second half, Dortmund just completely gave up. I think, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of the actual XG in the game, Dortmund picked up 2.27 XG in the first half and then just 0.72 in the second half. And it's this really cool website called Transfermarkt that lets you actually check points won if the league table was decided by first half and second halves. If the Bundesliga table this season was decided by first half results, Bayern Munich would be top with 27 points, and just below them would be Dortmund and Leverkusen on 24 points, so just 3 points off Bayern. If you then kind of switch that and take a look at league table based on second half performances, Stuttgart are top with 27 points, Bayern are second with 24 points, and Dortmund are 12th with 13 points. So far this season, Stuttgart have scored 13 goals and conceded 6 in the second half. Bayern have scored 20 and conceded 5. Dortmund have scored 8 and conceded 8. I think, that maybe sounds, it is obviously terrible, but I think you also bear in mind that they've actually only gone behind twice so far this season, Dortmund that is, and they do often take the lead. And I think we're definitely beginning to see a kind of trend here where Dortmund try and kind of blitz teams in the first half. They try win games in the first half, and they basically just kind of cling on in the second half. And I don't know if that's down to Kovac's tactics. I don't know if that's down to the fact that he doesn't have options off the bench. I suspect it might be. Or it might just be down to the fact that the squad's already struggling with fitness and form, despite the fact that we're not even in December yet. But, it's a team, it's a squad that were playing the Club World Cup through the summer, didn't have a full proper pre-season, and it's probably quite a small squad in the grand scheme of things. They don't have really any backups at wing back. Emre Can's still getting churned out at centre back. Their central midfield options, okay, there's some young players in there, but they're also very reliant on Pascal Gross and Marcel Sabitzer, who are both in the 30s. Gross well into his 30s. And that front three of Maximilian Bayer, Guirassy, and usually Adeyemi starts come hell or high water, regardless of whether they're actually playing well or not. So, I think there's a serious question that Dortmund probably do have to ask at this point in the season as to why things are beginning to crumble, why the wheels are beginning to fall off. And you could maybe have an argument and make an argument that, Kovac is certainly responsible to some extent, but I think there's far more evidence to suggest that this team, this squad, simply just needs a lot more work done to it. They need another centre forward. They need more wingers. They need more wing backs. They need probably another central defender as well, and some more kind of attacking midfielders as well in the middle of the pitch. And I said after the game on Saturday, I was like, a serious club would look at that performance right after the international break and say, right, this can't be down to form, or this can't be down to fitness, because these guys, most of them obviously play international football, so it's not like they've all just been sitting with their feet up for a week and a half. But I think there's a serious question mark as to whether the squad in the depth of it's good enough to do what Dortmund wanted to do, and it'll be interesting to see if they act upon that in January.
They need a centre forward, 100%. I mean, Guirassy, the way he's been playing right now, and I think Kovac's system, the 3-4-3, only works with a real number 9, right? Someone who consistently scores every single game, like Guirassy did for big parts of last season, and that's just lacking. And I know it's so funny to say these things after a 3-3 draw when Dortmund scored 3 goals, but the Hamburg game, for example, comes to mind, right? I would be more critical about that result actually than this result against the Stuttgart team that I think is very, very good. Sit even with them on points, 22 points, and I've seen Stuttgart live a couple of times in stadium this year, and I think they put together a really, really, really good squad that can hurt a lot of teams in the Bundesliga this year. So. I think I don't even see this result as critical. I'm more worried about the prior games, of course, right? Because that's where they drop points, because they didn't have maybe a number 9 that they need. So this is the things that are happening, and I think the entire club is just the stuff on the field. I think Kovac kind of set the stage a couple of weeks ago when he said, "Look, we were 25 points behind Bayern Munich last year, and we're not going to be able to make up that gap in 1 year." So I think the club is kind of ready and prepared to give him that runway. The question then for you, Matt, is, are the fans? You went to the AGM, right? Watzke, now new president. He was elected without an opponent, but still only received 59% of the vote. Now, this seems like a GDR-style election. I tell you what, if you don't receive more than 90% of the vote in that kind of GDR-style election, you're in real trouble. In other words, if this was a dictatorship, the dictator is on the verge of falling when he only gets 59% of the vote. I mean, that is. The kicker said it was a Denkzettel, right? A note that the fans are not happy with things are going, and there's lots of things at play here. Whether it's Rheinmetall, whether it's transfer policy, whether it's appointments, whether it's the way the club is put together at the moment, but you were there. How did Watzke react to not getting the courtesy 99% that he probably wanted?
He seemed visibly shocked. He seemed humbled by it, and I mean humbled in the more negative sense of the word. Whether this had genuinely shocked him a bit. He'd said himself in the build-up that anything. So it was already known that he was going to be standing unopposed. Got onto why in a sec. He said that anything less than 70% would be, quote, unacceptable for him. I was talking to a few people at the AGM, some colleagues from the press, some contacts from within the club, and basically asking, mainly to get a sort of an idea of the lay of the land for myself, really, because I don't go to many of these sorts of events, as is it even possible that he would get less than 50? I mean, less than 50% he would have lost, effectively. You have to get at least 50.
Very briefly, what would have happened if you lose an election unopposed?
Well, that's a good question. It didn't come to that. I mean, it's a good question. He would have lost. Maybe there would have been a revote, or there may even have been someone else who who proposed a candidacy from within the room potentially, or I imagine it would have gone to a revote. It didn't come to that, but I was asking, like, is it even possible that it would be less than 50%? And everyone was saying, no, that's unthinkable. That is absolutely not going to happen. Less than 50 is completely impossible. It'll be around 70-75%. That was the general feeling. Well, not 59. When 59% came up, that was a genuine shock. Only 9% off that 50% mark, and given the extremely small turnout, only 4,200 votes in the entire presidential election. I'm not going to work out the maths right now because I can't do it, but a 9% swing based on that turnout is not very many votes to go, which you need to go a different way to make that election look very different.
29, I think it was.
It would have been 29 votes, yeah.
I think someone told me.
So that's how close it would have been. So yeah, Manu, you said the word that people were using was a Denkzettel. Food for thought would be a good way of translating that, I suppose. The opposition to him is mainly based on I would suggest not necessarily on the sporting situation. I feel like the sporting situation at Borussia Dortmund over the past 10, 15, 20 years during Watzke's time, and even since the departure of Klopp, I feel like it's seen a lot more critically outside of Dortmund than in Dortmund. That's just my observation. The biggest issue over the past year and on the night in Dortmund on Sunday was the issue with Rheinmetall, the sponsor, and not necessarily just Rheinmetall, most specifically Watzke's treatment of a vote at last year's AGM. A motion was passed at last year's AGM, which wasn't a binding motion ordering the club leadership to act, but it was a motion that was passed to convey the membership's opinion, and that was a vast majority which were against this deal. And Watzke hasn't acted upon it. In his candidacy to become president of the club, he has promised that that there will be another membership survey, and that if it's the wish of the membership that this sponsor deal is to be discontinued, then he will abide by that, and he'll try and bring that about. It could feasibly end up in a situation which we saw with Bayern Munich with the Qatar Airways deal, in that ultimately, amid all the pressure, the deal was discontinued. However, it was allowed to run its contract length. The club took the money that was agreed, and were able to say at the end, okay, we've listened to you, we've discontinued the deal, but ultimately they've already benefited from it. It was also mentioned to me a few times that who knows what the situation over the next year will be regarding the general opinion on arms manufacturers. I mean, all sorts of socio-political things play a role there. So I think that was the main thing. There were a few speakers at the AGM who all got up and attacked Watzke on that level, basically. That seemed to be the main issue. But he's now the president of the club, and just for clarification, if people aren't quite clear, that's because he's stepped down as the CEO of the corporate listed company that runs the football side. He stepped down as that. He was CEO there for 20 years, and he stood for election to be president of the actual parent club. So that's what he is now. He stood alone. He stood unopposed because the current or the former president, a man by the name of Reinhold Luno, he withdrew his candidacy. He had threatened to stand against Watzke, based mainly on the Rheinmetall deal. But I think the two basically cleared up their differences behind the scenes and didn't want to risk basically splitting the club down the middle. So he stood aside and allowed Watzke to be elected. But yeah, like we said, with only 59% of the vote is seriously a seriously worrying sign for Hans-Joachim Watzke, and I think personally quite incredible actually how a man and how an operator with such a genuinely, objectively incredible legacy going at Borussia Dortmund, going back to 2005. He's genuinely credited with effectively saving the club, after taking over during the insolvency, leading them out of that through the Jurgen Klopp era. To be in a position now where he's only getting 59% of the vote and then getting booed, it's incredible how that turnaround can happen.
There's more though, right? There's also the sexual abuse scandal that came out in October that many members of the club feel wasn't handled well, or not just not handled well, but basically a public statement that said, right, and that fell under his stewardship, and that's a question in general. Has Hans-Joachim Watzke been a good steward of the football club, right? And yes, he saved the club, but you can't ignore the fact that it is 2 titles since Jurgen Klopp left. For the second largest football team in Germany. That is, I think, is something. If I was a Borussia Dortmund fan, either in Dortmund or outside of Dortmund, I think needs to be seen very critical. And stewardship of a football club doesn't just mean financial success; it also means success on the field. And I don't think there's been enough of it. And I think that was a big part of that vote. I know, Stefan, you're ready to jump in, so go for it.
Yeah, I often do kind of sharpen my fangs when we have a podcast about Watzke to jump into these things, and I don't really have to repeat all because, it's not like Matt's here as a spokesman or anything like that. But I think it was really interesting. I think it's interesting that his support at the club has wavered. I totally take Matt's point. I think a lot of people, myself included, do kind of project their hopes for the Bundesliga onto Dortmund because they are seen as the kind of most natural competitors to Bayern. So people look at them and say, why aren't they challenging like a Liverpool does, or an Atletico Madrid does, or a Napoli does, etc., etc. And the frustration can definitely be kind of palpable when you do speak to people at the club, or the club themselves speak, and they kind of shirk away from that responsibility. And I think Watzke has come to embody that. This is just maybe my impression. You guys can let me know if you think it's different in Germany, but my impression of Watzke has always been that he's kind of one of the old boys. He's become one of the establishment, whether that's at Dortmund or DFL, DFB, whatever, even like politically speaking. He'll get a pat on the back from guys like, Uli Hoeneß and Karl-Heinz Rummenigge, and
whoa, you say that.
Hoeneß
has some things to say about Watzke this
well,
week.
Yeah, I know you've got some quotes on them, I suppose, but like the kind of chummy relationship between Bayern and Dortmund can sometimes come across a little bit insensitive when you are kind of thinking that they should be sporting rivals to an extent. Not that board members should be, fisticuffs or anything like that, but yeah, I don't know. I guess, and I think we have spoken about this season. I do think Dortmund have benefited perhaps more than any other club aside from Bayern from the kind of way that modern European football has kind of solidified, in the sense that they can finish 4th very, very easily every year, and they can get into the Champions League, and they can kind of bumble around in that and put together 3-4 decent results, and all of a sudden they're in a final, or all of a sudden they're in a semi-final, and all of a sudden they've got 70 million euros in their back pocket. And the honest, in my opinion, it's the biggest problem is that a club like Dortmund don't actually have to work very hard for their money. They'd have to work very, very hard for titles, but that's not really a demand. And this brings it all back to the football on the pitch and Kovac, and the fact that they have already fallen well off the pace here, but there's no real expectation or demand for them to be on the pace in the first place. And like I said, it'll be interesting to see what happens in January, if anything at all, because that will kind of underline whether there is any expectation or ambition at the club.
I think that tightrope I referred to earlier regarding the Sporting situation on the pitch, I think it applies to Dortmund off the pitch as well as a club, and to Watzke. I think they're a very schizophrenic club. I think led by a very schizophrenic man who can stand for all sorts of different things at the same time. Almost in the same within a year, he's gone from championing the DFL's private equity investor deal, which led to the massive protest last year, to standing in front of his electorate in Dortmund yesterday, directly addressing the block of ultras and the organised fans and saying we're going to fight against these proposed security measures, and championing 50+1. So yeah, he's and I think he admits it himself as well. He made the point himself. He'll be aware of it. He said it's a constant balancing act. I think he used the word juggling. He's constantly juggling between his responsibility as the former CEO of the corporate side and his responsibility towards the shareholders and making money for them, and his responsibility now as the president of a club of 238,000 members who have voted for him, or 59% of whom turned up and voted for him.
5,000 of those voters voted for him.
Yeah, I mean, that's a different issue altogether. The topic of tiny turnouts at these events, not ideal, but different topic. They're a schizophrenic club, and it's a tightrope. And I think we said before, there's a lot of focus now on the new structure that Watzke has left behind him, and how Lars Ricken, as his successor, is going to deal with that on the sporting side. They've put their eggs in the Niko Kovac basket for the time being, with Sebastian Kehl still pulling the strings in terms of transfer policy. And personally, I would say that the jury is still very, very, very much out as to whether the two of them are up to the job. But I suppose time will tell, and the tightrope act continues.
It's almost like he acts like a politician. He would, of course, say that he's a Geschäftsmann, a businessman, but
he's the ultimate politician.
He's the ultimate politician, and that's, he's a member of the CDU, and
very close mates with the Chancellor.
Very close mates with the Chancellor, and the club is run like a political entity in so many ways, and that it always tries to find a consensus rather than go for ultimate success. And I think the best sporting entities in the world are always run by people who go all in and display risk. You have to take risks to be successful, and that's just not happening there. And a man who knows all about taking risks and taking the ultimate risks and has gone to jail for it, even, as Uli Hoeneß, and he took to a podcast this week. Speaking of Uli Hoeneß and his buddy Hans-Joachim Watzke, what I kind of miss. You kind of alluded to it, Stefan. They're all kind of buddies now. I'm old enough to remember the 1990s when they would go on TV shows. Christoph Daum and Uli Hoeneß would go on TV show and they would fight. They would go and fight with one another, and Lemke was at Bremen, for example, Rudi Assauer and Hoeneß. They would go on TV shows and they would yell at each other. There would be proper shouting matches. There was proper hate. There was a disagreement on what was the right way of running football teams. There was a disagreement on how Bayern Munich behaved. Now they've just being communist cadres, they all just fallen in line with him. It's kind of sad. And I think even Uli himself wishes there was more of the good old days where people would just disagree with him on things.
You can have an argument with 1860s president. That's going well at the moment, isn't it?
I think Bayern doesn't even know he exists.
I was going to say Uli can pick a fight in an empty room. That's the thing that's so miraculous about him.
But you know what? He had a lot to say in this podcast, and he's coming from a position of strength at the moment, right? What is it, 400+ days that Bayern Munich have been top of the Bundesliga table now? They're playing fantastic football. Another big result for them. They're first in the Champions League. They're playing a big game against Arsenal. They have young talents now coming through. So that wasn't one of the demands that wasn't met, that he really wanted and stressed. And now, Leonard Carl is playing regular minutes and he's looking like a great player. Could be going to the World Cup. Mr. Mike got minutes as well, and there's more young talent coming through. So it's an ideal Bayern Munich world at the moment if you're Uli Hoeneß. And from that position of strength, he went out and he released a bunch of bombshells, firing at Dortmund, firing at Stuttgart, firing at Eintracht Frankfurt, saying maybe these clubs have to think about 50+1 in that structure. Maybe Hans-Joachim Watzke should take a moment and think about a few things, is what he said. And we can talk about 50+1 until the cows come home, as Stefan always likes to say. And like Matt, you write a ton about it. And I don't want to discuss 50+1 because we're 34 minutes into this podcast and we don't have 4 hours. But I listen to some of the things that Hoeneß says, and I roll my eyes and think, oh my God, here he is again. And then sometimes I listen to Uli Hoeneß and I think, yeah, you know what? He's not wrong. He has that ability to polarize in a way that you can agree with him and you can really disagree with him. And there was a lot in that podcast where I'm just like, no, Uli, like his stance on women's football, I'm just like, no, buddy, like that's not it. That is old man Uli speaking. But he's right. Like it's, him saying Bayern Munich is the last club who wouldn't welcome challengers. I think he's spot on about that. And I think the tie it in with Dortmund, that is a big, I think it's him pointing at Dortmund. I don't think he's necessarily even saying we should get rid of 50+1, but he's saying clubs like Dortmund should think about ways to make the league more competitive, because at the end of the day, that's not up to Bayern Munich.
I think you're right. It's throwing grenades around is what Uli Hoeneß does, particularly from a position of strength. I wasn't particularly surprised to hear his comments, and I don't think they're not particularly new or revolutionary. It's Uli Hoeneß is Uli Hoeneß himself will also be well aware that it's not. We've been through this a million times. It's not 50+1 holding these teams back. It's the distribution of Champions League money. And that's a problem that affects every league.
Well, no, I think what he means is that that outside money could soften the structures that is so embedded now in European football. That teams could get more money. Of course, that ignores things like, there's financial fair play. Like the reason why RB Leipzig are not investing billions in their football clubs like they did in their Formula One team is because there's UEFA mechanisms that hold that back, right? You can't just do a Man City anymore nowadays. Even if look at Newcastle, they would have loved to do a Man City, but there's mechanisms in place now that stop that. So you're not wrong, Matt. You're absolutely not wrong. But I think some of these clubs would be helped with bringing in people that can maybe help them and get new ideas. And I think that's really what he means by that.
No, that's why I'd be interested to see how the new structure now at Dortmund without Watzke in the professional football side goes about that. And the one area where I would then tendentially agree with Uli Hoeneß is that this demand for some more risk. All right, Uli Hoeneß has formulated it in the way of, we'll get rid of 50+1, which I think that
but he also said that it would never happen at Bayern Munich because you need a three-quarter majority. So we would never do it, and it should be up to the individual clubs.
Exactly, and he knows full well that it's not the issue. He's just used it as a provocative formulation. But the idea that he has behind it, just the idea of just some more risk, I think is fair. Then again, the counter argument would be it's very easy to make that argument when you're speaking from the position of strength of Bayern Munich. Whereas if you were to be an Eintracht Frankfurt or a Stuttgart or a Dortmund, the moment you take that risk, it doesn't come off. And Hans-Joachim Watzke would make the argument that's what Dortmund did in the late 90s, that they effectively bought 2 titles and a Champions League title in the late 90s with money which they couldn't afford to pay back, and they almost paid the ultimate price for it. Schalke took risks with their transfer policy more recently in order to reach the Champions League and have ended up spending time in the second division. HSV again, not quite Champions League, but again, these teams do take risks, but there are enough examples of those risks backfiring very, very, very dangerously. It's easy for Bayern Munich to say that, but as soon as anybody else who is reliant on Champions League money to maintain a Champions League level squad, as soon as they then miss out on that Champions League, they find themselves in a disastrous situation. So it's a lot. I get the point that he's making, and on some level, I appreciate the grenade being thrown in just to stir things up. I get it, but it's very easy for him to say.
I think. This one really just kind of goes back to what I was kind of saying about the way that I think certain clubs in the Bundesliga are very comfortable with the current situation. And I think Dortmund are a perfect example of that. And I think that's kind of what Watzke kind of alludes to, really. Hoeneß alludes to.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps, like you said, Manu, we can argue about 50+1 and what that maybe specifically does or doesn't limit when it comes to Dortmund. Or clubs like Dortmund in terms of their ambition. But ultimately, the current system rewards Dortmund for not being risky. It rewards them for getting into the Champions League off the back of finishing fourth. It rewards them for selling their best players every summer because there are clubs that are willing to pay over the odds for them.
Can I add something too? You also now get rewarded to play Club World Cup, which if you're Dortmund, you're probably always in it because you're Germany's second biggest team.
Yeah, exactly. So there's...
Although they only qualified for last year's Club World Cup by reaching the final of the Champions League. It was nothing to do with their positioning.
No, because
in the
like
Bundesliga.
the way it's designed that only 2 teams from one country can go.
Even so, they qualified for that based on their Champions League performance. That's why I say how much of a tightrope it is for them. Let's think of a parallel universe in which Dortmund don't get past Atletico Madrid and then PSG into the Champions League final, and thereby they don't rake in the UEFA money from that competition. They therefore don't qualify for the Club World Cup and rake in that money. And then Niko Kovac ultimately fails, maybe by 1 point or a goal difference, to qualify for the Champions League on the final day of the season. Suddenly, you've got a situation where Dortmund are for the first time in 10 years not in the Champions League, with a squad which, whether you like it or not, whether you think the quality is good enough or not, is a different topic, but it's been built for the Champions League on Champions League wages, and there's something not in it. A club can only sustain that then for maybe 1-2 years max before they find themselves in serious trouble. So again, that's just, I suppose I just like to point out the devil's advocate argument against taking the risk, although I do agree with Stefan that maybe the situation does lead them to be a little bit too comfortable in making that. I think in Dortmund, just an example, they would probably argue that there was nothing comfortable about the situation they found themselves in. It was actually quite a risky situation. Such are the calculations at play in modern football, I suppose.
Yeah, but I mean, we are still talking about a football club here that has seen its revenue. I mean, I'm on the really good website called Swiss Ramble, who does an excellent newsletter on sports finance. I just checked it there while we were talking there, and Dortmund's revenue, just raw revenue, has gone up from 338 million in 2021 to 509 million 4 years later.
They released the new figures this week.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the 2024 figures.
Yeah, this year's it's a record again, 526 million turnover. Yeah.
Well, there we go then. So that's almost double. In fact, I think it is double what they were making as recently as like 2022. So we're talking about a club here that's making more money than, if it was a business, it would be like boom times. The revenue's going from strength to strength to strength.
And yet the profits announced this year, I think the after-tax profits were only 6.5 million. So it's such is the expenditure on the squad. And again, that's a different topic then as to how good is the squad and has Sebastian Kehl put together.
Almost no football club makes money. It's only in Germany
but it's also
make money.
But it's the same reason why Amazon don't post a profit every year, because smart businesses find ways to not post profits. But
as you Dortmund are a listed they're on the stock exchange, which they would now say Amazon. they should never have done. And Watzke himself told me last year that was a mistake. He wouldn't do it again, but he found that situation. So they are where they are. They have to post these figures, which is
no. Yeah, of course I know that. Look, we're way over on the Dortmund stuff here. My point is, I was making is that I think the profit line can be a bit of a misdemeanor when it comes to football finances, because a lot of clubs obviously go out of their way to not post profits, so they'll find some way to kind of use up that money.
I mean, look at Barcelona, who were like millions in debt and still were able to put a competitive team together. Football teams are they're literally too big to fail. They're the only industry where you're too big to fail.
Yeah, exactly. But
we really need to move on
because people want to hear about Bayern and stuff, and we're 4 minutes into Dortmund's financial results here.
And we do still want to talk about briefly about that bonkers game between Köln and Frankfurt as well. I mean, Bayern, of course, I mentioned it already. Uli Hoeneß coming from a position of strength, that 6-2 win. I need to say something and clear this up for the record. When Freiburg were up 2-0, I was thinking, this is a great story. And then Stefan wrote in a chat that we're in it, they're going to win this game 4-2. Well, Stefan, you were wrong. You were
So,
absolutely
5-2,
wrong.
yeah.
They won that game 6-2.
Oh, jeez.
I mean, unbelievable performance by Bayern Munich. This kid, Leonard Carl, is just the way he's been playing as a 17-year-old is phenomenal. And it's a hard thing to do in a team like Bayern Munich, to come in and step up. And he's getting more minutes with Luis Diaz being suspended for 3 Champions League games. I suspect he's the one on the short list to come straight in, and rightfully so. He's earned himself that place, and he's probably, if he continues to play like this and stays healthy, fingers crossed, gonna be in that World Cup squad as well. But so many things are going well for Bayern Munich. I mean, they couldn't have scripted it better. They could go into the season with a squad that many deemed too thin, and then you had not one but 2 talents stepping up. There's players now coming back, healthy. They might find themselves in a situation soon, Stefan, where they won't know what to do with players like Musiala and Davis when they come back.
That was literally the point I was going to raise. So you took the words right in my mouth, because I didn't catch this game. I watched the highlights, but watching them, thinking, where the hell did he squeeze Musiala into this team?
Yeah.
It's so bizarre that, and I'm probably not the first person to raise this point, but it's so bizarre that Bayern have a head coach who is known for such stalwart defending as a player, and he has taken this club to maybe not new heights, but former heights in terms of just this kind of gung-ho attacking football. Only 2 clubs in the Bundesliga have conceded more set-piece goals than Bayern this season. They're not really amongst the worst offenders in that regard among Europe's top league, but they're certainly about mid-table. Defensively, I think they are still a little bit wonky. It's worth noting that Freiburg probably could have scored 2 other goals in the first half. Obviously, I think Besta came close, and then I think there was a chance it was technically offside, I suppose. But Bayern just did what Bayern do, and I think maybe Uli Hoeneß, was maybe watching the way that Upamecano just kind of tapped in that goal from the corner, completely unmarked, and maybe that was what kind of spurred him on to say, right, we maybe do need to start having some more competition, because this is getting silly. Because there's already been like 3 or 4 occasions this season where I've watched teams just give up against Bayern. And it seems to be happening more and more and more.
Freiburg
they completely
100%,
gave up, and it's really frustrating, because, I mean, in any game of football, like the way that the manner in which the game turned against Freiburg, you can understand by the time they got to like 4th or 5th goal going in, people were just going to throw their hands up in there. But I don't know. It was that wasn't a great look for the league. But having said all that, this is also a Bayern team that completely dismantled PSG in Paris. They'll be coming up against a very good Arsenal side. You could certainly argue as to the importance of this game, since both teams have already kind of picked up enough points in the group stages. But it's going to be really interesting to see how they do against an Arsenal team that are strolling to the Premier League titles so far, maybe based off the back of Man City and Liverpool imploding more than anything else. But Arsenal looked very impressive against Tottenham on Sunday, so that will be a better yardstick, I think, to compare to judge this Bayern team rather than Freiburg. But no, fair play to Bayern, and Kompany just hasn't put it wrong. He's brought young players in, they're attacking very well. We'll see if that defence can kind of shore itself up when the time comes, but for now, yeah, spot on.
Yeah, I do think you're quite right. The Champions League table, the way they set up, both Arsenal and Bayern are going to be in that top 8, right? Which gives you a bye in that first in the first round of the knockout stages. Having said that, I think both of these teams really want to make a statement. This is arguably we're going to find out, I guess, who is the best team in Europe at the moment by form.
Just want to add on Leonard Carl. Thought he was out of a series of good performances, this was his best yet. I think the biggest compliment I can pay him after Saturday is that Harry Kane had a relatively quiet game.
Mm-hmm.
He only scored 1, but I thought the way Leonard Carl played was reminiscent of Harry Kane, mainly in the way that he was dropping deep, as Harry Kane often does. He was winning balls in deeper areas, he was turning midfielders, he was driving into space, and then laying the ball off and then arriving late in the box himself. All of these qualities that we've praised Harry Kane for as having added to his game since his arrival in Munich. I thought Leonard Carl did an extremely good job of doing that on Saturday. So yeah, even despite the fact that Harry Kane had one of his quieter games, I thought Leonard Carl absolutely slipped into his all round shoes. Really impressive.
17. 17. That's unbelievable.
Can I jump in with some absolutely bonkers Harry Kane stats that I stumbled upon from my newsletter this week, which just sums up the mental season he's having. So, despite Guirassy actually having a higher non-penalty XG than Harry Kane this season, so just think about that for a minute. Guirassy has more XG than Bayern outside of penalties. Kane's got 4.5 to Guirassy's 5.09. And Kane's only hit one more shot on target than Guirassy. He's got twice the goals than him. He's got 10 compared to Guirassy's 5, if I'm not mistaken. Kane is converting 38.3% of his shots, and Guirassy's converting 18.5%. And that's not to say that Guirassy's had a bad season. I think Guirassy, well, you could definitely argue Guirassy has had a bad season, but in terms of his actual stats, his conversion rate's actually pretty normal. It's the fact that Kane's are insane. And we saw that in that game and that goal. Like, extremely fortuitous the way the ball kind of landed at him, but he pounced on it. He pounced on it perfectly and scored that goal.
Same against Union Berlin, Stefan. I mean, that cross came out of nowhere and he's there.
Yeah.
You know, he wasn't there the entire game and then boom.
Yeah. And he's out for England as well. I'm sure Matt could say, and the fact that he just seems to be the absolute very top of his game right now. It's working very well for him in Bayern.
I have a vote at the Guardian 100 list, and as part of the voting process, and we're not supposed to reveal who we vote for and how we vote, but we get 40 votes that we rank.
Where are you going to put Odrago?
He's not on the list, but Harry Kane was. Without saying where I put him very, very high at the moment. I think he is. This is probably the best he's been his entire career.
In terms of pure goal scorers, I think maybe only Haaland can compare to him. To be honest with you, even Mbappe's probably dropped down a little bit below him because part of my job is to kind of track both those players, and Haaland is kind of a step above Mbappe in terms of pure goals this season, and I think Harry Kane's the only one that can compete with him. And it just kind of compounds these really strong victories that they seem to be kind of lapping up with these this season for sure.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. Really good. No, I did not put Oetraogo on that list. Neither did I put this Köln player that I want to talk about, who we maybe mentioned before already on the show, Said Al-Mala. But I suspect, Stefan, that maybe in a couple of years, if the Guardian lets me keep voting, I might have to put Karl, Al-Mala, and Oetraogo on this list. This game, I mean, what a game of football. 3-4 Frankfurt win. It looked so comfortable for Frankfurt. We were up 4-1 at one point, and then Köln brought on Said Al-Mala, and if a 4-4 at the end of the day, that really wouldn't have been unjustified, I think. We had this argument after the game, should Al-Mala have started? Because once he did come on, Köln just played way better. And you made the point that, he's been better off the bench. And I understand what you mean because, like the way he comes on and just changes the game and has the ability to really run at opponents' defenses, his crossing technique. There's one player that comes to mind who could cross the ball like that. And Al-Mala is nothing like this player, but, that crossing technique is almost the same as Sebastian Deisler, who could just out of nowhere just cross the ball with such finesse. Is something that I think is spectacular to watch. And I guess that really, as amazing as this game was, from a neutral perspective, and I saw Köln fans who were just up and applauding and really going with it as well. I guess the question is, what are they going to do with Al-Mala? Like, do you start him more often? Do you keep him where he's at right now on the bench and bring him on as a weapon late in the second half? Like, it's a good debate to have, isn't it?
I mean, the simple answer to what FC Köln are going to do with El Mala is they're going to sell him.
Yeah,
they're going to sell him immediately.
I mean, that is a good answer too, and they're going to sell him
as soon as anyone,
name the amount.
As soon as anyone dangles 20 to 30 million,
no, it's going to be more than that.
Sell him.
It's going to be a lot more than that, I think.
But no, yeah, you're right. That is the debate: start him or not. He did change the game when he came on, and like you said, particularly his penetration and his crossing, that really short backlift he has. I know we have to be so careful about just comparing these young players to the most ridiculous of names, and Uli Hoeneß told everyone off for comparing Leonard Carl to Messi, so he can happily tell me off for comparing Saïd El Mala to Ronaldo. But I only mean it purely in the sense of this crossing style with the very short backlift that he has, striking the ball with a very straight leg, short backlift, and getting that sort of dip on the ball. Perfect example is Cologne's third goal.
Yeah.
On Saturday night, where he puts that cross in, so I think he demonstrates that perfectly there. So again, just for clarity, I'm absolutely not comparing Saïd El Mala to Cristiano Ronaldo. Just making that comparison of his
Deisler. I can stick to Germans. Deisler.
Yeah. And he changed the game. Even apart from that, he hit the post. So yeah, he definitely made a difference. We've seen his talent as well. You know, his goals against Hoffenheim away was the big one that he scored. On the other hand, the counter argument is that there are games in which he started, which he's been much less effective. Just before the international break, I was at the derby away at Mönchengladbach when Joe Scally at right back for Gladbach completely took Saïd El Mala out of the game, to the point where he was taken off at half time, and Lucas Kwasniok said afterwards, straight up, word for word, I took him off because he wasn't very good today. And that's how easy it can be done. The week before that, I think I'm right in saying, it was the Hamburg game. Hamburg doubled up on him really, really well for 60 odd minutes until they went down to 9 men. At which point Cologne then tore them apart, but it was 11 against 9. So yeah, there have been enough occasions when El Mala has started games and hasn't had the impact that he's had off the bench, and that's one of the things that differentiates him from Leonard Carl, for example. Although they are not entirely the same player, but in terms of impact as a starter, I think Leonard Carl has been much more impressive on that note. But yeah, I think it's a debate which is ongoing in Cologne, and we'll see how that progresses. It was a mad game. I don't think I've seen many games end 4-3 when they've had such large periods where nothing happened.
Well, everything happened in the second half.
Well, yeah, in very short moments. Obviously, you had the Cologne's opener was in the first 5 minutes when everyone was focused on the atmosphere boycott anyway. And then pretty much nothing happens until half time, just before half time, and Frankfurt score 2. Really, really impressive how I think Frankfurt moved their press higher and higher up the pitch and forced Cologne into mistakes. Because I think as confident and as how brave and reckless Cologne can be, they also make mistakes, and that certainly happened ahead of the second Frankfurt goal. And then you had the Johnny Burkhardt show in the first 10-15 minutes of the second half. Absolutely outstanding. And again, I'm going to draw that Harry Kane comparison in the build-up to, I think it must have been the first Burkhardt goal, where he spreads the ball out wide to Ritsu Doan with a fantastic pass. Doan beats Lunt on the right and crosses in, and Burkhardt has made the late run into the front post. Absolutely outstanding goal.
The little Cruyff turn for a second was outstanding.
The Cruyff turn for the second was absolutely outstanding, and he could have had a third. He had a header which was tipped over the bar by Marvin Schweber in the first half. So he has that side to his game as well. One of the most impressive signings of the season, surely, Johnny Burkhardt at Frankfurt.
But that was never in doubt. I think we all knew that, right? To answer your question about how much money Köln are going to get for Saïd El Mala, under contract until 2030, no release clause. So when you said 30 million euros, I would at least double that.
Sure, they'll try.
It will probably not only break Köln's transfer record, it will absolutely shatter it. Like
Yeah.
if Stuttgart
They're
got
not-
75 million euros from Nick Woltemade,
Yeah. They're not exactly a club known for selling players, though, are they? Like Anthony Modeste, still the record signing or selling. That was to some dodgy Chinese deal, you know. So, and do you know what's second after
That's one
that?
of the most Cologne sales ever. That how they came
Yeah.
out of that.
Do you know
in
who's
profit.
second on the list after that?
Lucas Podolski,
Lucas Podolski in 2012. So
12 million, right?
they seem to be the only German club that have never sold any decent players in the last 5 or 6
Well,
years.
yeah,
So
that's
yeah,
because the last good player they brought through, they sold him to Leverkusen for 400,000.
yeah. Well,
And
well,
we'll see. Is he good?
I don't know. I don't know where he ended up.
don't ask
Okay.
Liverpool fans that. That's for sure.
No, but
Can I before we wrap up, guys? Just 2 things from me on this game, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Well, actually, 3. Echo what Matt said about Burkhardt. He looked fantastic, and I think he needed that because I think he'd coming off the back of 3 or 4 games without scoring. Great to see Mahmoud Dahoud on the score sheet as well, who's kind of making a slow and steady return to form in German football after kind of burning out a wee bit. But also just the fact that, you know, we had a lot of praise for Cologne. Manu, when we did that kind of bonus show on the power rankings, and how I was saying that Kwasniok's done a really good job actually with Cologne and picking up the points in the games that they should be picking up points. But I think, they obviously ran Frankfurt absolutely ragged in this game and could have ended up picking up a point, which would have probably been deserved for sure. A Frankfurt team, by the way, who'd only conceded 2 goals in the last 5 games going into this game, and we'd kind of given them quite a lot of praise recently, saying that they'd maybe sorted that, but far from it. And, you know, in kind of classic, you know, fashion, Robin Koch and Arthur Thiat are probably pound for pound the most entertaining centre-back duo in the Bundesliga this season, because
In the opposition box as well, if you look at Thiat's header, I have no idea whether he meant that or not.
Yeah, he did
Surely
that. He
not.
also set up the goal for Burkhardt's second with a beautiful long ball, and this is why he's so highly rated. And he actually gave an interview with Kicker, I think, this week, saying that he turned down offers this season from 2 or 3 clubs to stay at Frankfurt. And he's, you know, if someone could just teach the guy how to follow a runner and mark in the box, he'd be world class. I honestly think that, because going forward, he's an outstanding centre half, but the guy can't defend to save himself. Or if he could, he's picking up all the long lessons from Robert Koch, and it's causing havoc for Frankfurt. But they got out of this one alive for now. But yeah, I think Cologne, off the back of this and already early performances, look like they should be absolutely fine this season, assuming they don't sell any wonder kids in January.
no, I think
I'm a little bit more sort of confident regarding Frankfurt than you are, I think, Stefan. I think I wouldn't, apart from the last 10 minutes, I wouldn't say they were sort of blown away by Cologne. I thought they, after the early shock, I thought they worked themselves into the game really, really well. However, they are a bit of a wild, incomplete sort of team, as I mentioned. I'm not entirely convinced by a midfield 2 of Chaibi and Dahoud. I agree, it's great to see him back on the score sheet, but it was quite a porous midfield. The front 3, I think, are good. There's definitely goals in there. Doan, Knauf and Burkhardt. Mario Götze has one of his quieter games, drifting out to the right quite a lot, if memory serves correctly. But yeah, to almost throw that away from a position of leading 4-1, it looks dramatic, but then again, I thought it was maybe a little bit flattering on Frankfurt that they were even 4-1 up in the first place. But then again, they're 5 Bundesliga games unbeaten now.
Yeah.
And yeah, so there's some stability coming into that. So fair play to them.
My final point, maybe to wrap also up the show, I think with Eintracht Frankfurt, there's a thing that I noticed, that they are, and you put it in this article, the launische Diva from mine, right? The how did you translate it? You had a really good translation for it.
The
moody diva, the moody diva from
the
mine.
moody diva. I prefer that one, I think. Yeah, the moody diva.
The moody diva, and I think they are very moody this year, and they have this ability to be really aggressive, fast, attacking, and to be a spectacle like they were against Galatasaray. But they also really struggle when they face teams that just go with them on that level in the attack. When the opponent goes fast and hard and physical at them, they exactly what they do to other teams really hurts them. We saw that against Galatasaray when they beat Galatasaray 5-1. We saw it when they lost to 5-1 to Liverpool. And we saw both of it in this game.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, that when Köln decided to bring on a guy who was fast and physical, like El Mala, all of a sudden they wavered and they're like, oh no, they're doing with us what we usually do with others, and they don't seem to really have a solution for it. And I think
even I think it was said on Friday night, even the first goal was similar to that.
Yeah, 100%. It was hard. Like the way Agner worked that goal in is a really, really good example for that. So yeah, that's maybe my final thought on Frankfurt. It was a spectacular game, and no one should ever say that we don't cover Köln, because I think we did a good job here.
I feel like we cover Cologne quite a lot. It's good to talk about Frankfurt for once.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, guys, let's wrap this up. We're over an hour. Just a programming note, we will be doing Champions League coverage. So if you look for Leverkusen, etc., we're gonna cover them after the Champions League games, because they're playing Man City, Dortmund against Villarreal, Arsenal, Bayern, and Frankfurt against Atalanta. So some really good Champions League games this week. And guys, that was fun. Let's do it again soon. Until next time, auf Wiedersehen.